not super big on fake mid-season awards. It's kind of a trite vehicle for people in my industry to drum up content, but I'm also not exactly above it. Good morning to you. Good Friday morning. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports, and this is Daily Shot of Penguins. It comes your way bright and early every weekday. If you're into football and or baseball, I also offer daily shots of Steelers and Pirates in the same place that you found this. Penguins versus the Panthers tonight, Sunrise, Florida. A second crack at taking down the defending champs again. And depending on which side of the ledger you're on with this recent discussion among the fan base as to which is more real, the 10-5-1 run, or the fact that the Penguins have just been winning one and losing one and winning one and losing one for a couple of weeks now. I prefer the 10-5-1 in large part because the Penguins have scored a lot of goals. And I've long been of the opinion that when the Penguins, maybe more than any franchise in the NHL, are scoring goals, they're themselves, regardless of what they're founded on, regardless of what they need to be making their top priority. When they're scoring, they're at least feeling something, you know? And as it would turn out, the 61 goals that the Penguins have scored in that 10-5-1 run is number one in the league. Number one. As such, in looking at my mid-season player of the year, I'm going to move away from the obvious, which would almost always be Sidney Crosby, even though I don't doubt for a second that he is absolutely that, and instead do something that he himself would do, which is to point to somebody else who's maybe risen up, who's gone above and beyond, I don't know, performance from last year, performance over a recent segment of the career. Whichever the case would be, Rickard Rakell checks all of the boxes. Rakell's my guy. And I'm not going to excessively complicate this. Rakell's got 17 goals, most on the team. Only 3 of those have come on the power play. And within that, he's got an 18.9 shooting percentage that's 11th best in the NHL. Now, you can look at some of that and say, all right, well, anybody who has a shooting percentage that's too high, they're due to come back down to earth. And what happened to Raquel last year when he went 20-some games without a goal? And isn't this a little bit fluky in general? He had 28 goals for the Penguins a couple years ago, but you have to go back to 7 years ago in Anaheim when he was topping 30 a couple times in a row for the last time he was this prolific as far as finishing. But here's what I've got to say, and I'm saying this as someone who hung with Raquel through that long slump last year, because even though in the first part of that slump he wasn't scoring, he was doing everything else right and just getting robbed. And eventually it started to get to him, started squeezing his stick. Eventually the stick became sawdust and it started to spread throughout the rest of his game. Then he was hurt. Then he came back, had his mind clear, had his slate clear, and resumed scoring and helped the Penguins get close anyway to making the playoffs. This season, dude's been dynamite from just day one. Not just the shooting, it's also the passing, the vision, battles along the boards, battles against the end boards, where he's been really effective, I think. He's become a big piece of the Penguins' process in getting through the neutral zone in a hurry, something I described for listeners a couple of weeks ago, but I'll remind now that he learned from watching the Stars when they were in town. Remember the demolition? Yeah, that. Okay, well, he actually found a positive in that because he was watching Dallas's right-handed shooters come up the left wing, pull up, and send the puck to the other side of the rink. And in his case, that's Sid and Brian Rust over there. So he does pretty well with whoever's at the far end of that pass. And it's really, really worked for the Penguins. That was his initiative, not the coach's. But I'm going to tell you something else that I like about Raquel. He works. And I'm not even talking about in games. I made a mental note of this when I was in Detroit a couple days ago at the practice that the Penguins had in that facility underneath Little Caesars Arena. It was a session that really just should have been. I don't often advocate outright insurrection, but if the Penguins had been really half-hearted about that hour there, I wouldn't have blamed them, because they're going out there at 11 a.m. They had an 8 p.m. face-off the previous night, played really hard against the Red Wings, just didn't get rewarded with the result. And there's Raquel out there, and believe me, he wasn't the only one, but there's Raquel just busting his behind, talking with the team leaders, making sure that things were done right. And then, and something you normally would never mention, I certainly wouldn't, I don't make a habit of it, he scored a bunch of goals. Like, when this guy has an opportunity in a drill to finish with a shot on a live goaltender, he will seize this. He will bear down, he will find his spot, and he will crush it. He'll also do it, depending on the type of drill, a bunch of different ways. And if you think in your head about the way Raquel scores, you don't really have one trademark shot in your head, do you? No, me neither. He doesn't. So the session got done, and I go into the room, I take care of a couple of important bits of news, talk to Jesse Puljujarvi, blah, blah, blah. And I head over to Raquel, just seen him sitting there. And I asked him about scoring all those goals in practice. And he thought I was kidding. He starts laughing a little bit. And I go, no, dude, I'm being serious. You score a lot of goals in practice, and you do it a lot of different ways. And as I shared with him, you don't often see players who are naturally talented going that far out of their way to do it. And that was when he turned serious and said to me, I don't feel like I'm the type of player for whom anything has come easy. And I got to tell you, I've talked to this guy a lot since he's been in Pittsburgh, and I've never heard him say something like that. And on that specific count, I never expected to hear it, because he's one of those guys that when you watch him, you see him do so many things that are above average in terms of skill that you just feel like he fell out of the womb that way, you know, that he was just like that as a 4-year-old in Sweden or something. But I'm here to share with you that observation about him. When you see him scoring all these goals, but when you see it come, you know, on a backhand or from behind the net or a long range wrister, sometimes he'll shoot a one-timer for a slap shot that'll either go in or represent one hell of a hard save for the goaltender. He has gotten a lot done this year in a lot of different ways. And for someone who's early in a multi-year and lucrative contract, that's commendable unto itself. He's highly motivated to be as good as he is. When we come back, J1Q. This episode is brought to you by Bet Online, your number one source for all your summer sports needs this season, from Major League Baseball, golf, NHL, NBA playoffs. Get the latest odds and lines, including all team matchups, player props, odds on just about everything that's out there. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to get in on the action. Bet Online, where the game starts.
Abandoned ship, Bob. Sell the team. Are you a Pirates fan who is angry or apathetic about our perennial losing baseball team? Do you feel helpless because you don't know how to make a difference? Well, good news. We have something you can do about it. Join our Sell the Team movement. We're a group of passionate fans voicing our frustration and demanding change through billboard campaigns, press outreach, protests, and involvement at local city government meetings. Go to OurTeamNotHis.com to get involved.
Today's J1Q comes from Rocco, who says, DK, I'm glad they're playing a more cohesive and more responsible style of hockey, and it may indeed end up producing better results over the next 40 games. But ultimately, they just played 3 consecutive games against teams below them in the standings and earned 2 of 6 possible points. So, I hear you, my man. And listen, one thing I learned a long time ago in this line of work is that in general here, not everybody, but in general, fans don't want to hear about intangible progress. If you score a goal, you scored a goal. If you didn't score one for, 32 games like Drew O'Connor, then you stink. Then you were doing everything wrong. And that makes sense. Sports are a results-oriented business. At the end of the day, nobody cares about how you did in the mythical power rankings or whatever else, or where you are in a certain team-level statistic. It's how many did you win? How many did you lose? Period. Now, I have spent the better part of the past week really emphasizing some less tangible traits that I've seen in the team that I really like, that I find encouraging. I've also been attaching a little asterisk to every mention of such a thing in saying, listen, it doesn't mean they're going to beat so-and-so. It certainly doesn't mean they're going to beat the defending Stanley Cup champions on their ice tonight. It does mean, and again, this is from my own perspective, that for the first time really throughout this season, and maybe even going back over the past couple, I see a way out. I see the road ahead that's there if the Penguins continue to choose to take it. And by that, I mean among the players. It's my feel from being around the team that they're bought in, that they've seen this, they've figured it out, they've accepted it, they've even embraced it. So I like that. That's part of it. Here's the other part of it. While I can understand, Rocco, that you're going to look at the scores and say, wow, this is just terrible, and they lost these games against these crappy teams that they should have beaten. My counter to that, well, first off, my counter to that is you're right, okay? My second counter to that is last night in the NHL, there were 12 games played yesterday. The Bruins, the Capitals, the Islanders, the Flyers, the Sabres, and the Senators all lost. Want to know why? Because the conference isn't really very good. We're used to having the NHL as a whole feel weighted toward the East. Even when it isn't accurate, we're used to feeling that way because it's been that way for quite some time. But in the East, even if you look at the teams that are in the top 6 spots, you're not going to get super excited about most of them. I mean, yeah, you've got your Florida and you've got Washington having just a stunning year, including keeping their heads above water while Alexander Ovechkin was out. You've got Toronto for whatever that's worth. And you've, of course, got the champs. But Boston happens to be one of those teams, and Boston is not playing well. Boston isn't showing well. My feel is that Tampa Bay is going to end up vaulting Boston, and the Bruins are going to end up being one of those teams that are right in that mix, battling for the 2 wildcard spots along with the Penguins. There's not a whole bunch of quality there. And since everybody's so tight right now, and it's crazy, like anytime you're having a conversation about a playoff pool and the Sabres are mathematically alive in it, you're really, really reaching. But the Blue Jackets are mathematically in it. And the Penguins, as you and I are speaking right now, are 1 point behind the Senators. And I don't think that much of the Senators. So what I'm saying here is, yes, every single result matters. To a team that's missed the playoffs by a single point, every outcome counts. Every outcome. But I dare say that it counts more in this broader context that the Penguins just become a better, more consistent, identity-worthy team. Because if they become that, they'll surpass this mediocre pack. And if that happens, the little missed point here or there, as uncomfortable as they feel in the moment, I think that's going to be forgotten. Maybe. Anyway, I don't know. It's all going to come down to whether or not they get serious about the goaltending as to how far we can have this conversation. I appreciate the question. I appreciate everybody listening to Daily Shot of Penguins. We'll be back with another one of these on Monday.